Mom, the judge said, turning toward the woman seated near the clerk's desk. The entire courtroom felt strangely quiet, the kind of silence that makes every small movement sound louder than it should. Papers rustled. A chair creaked somewhere in the back row. But most people were simply waiting. You're the custodian of records from the county recorder's office, correct? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. The woman replied calmly. Then please read the recording number into the record. She adjusted her glasses and glanced down at the document in front of her. Instrument number 2026-0-1847. The moment she read it aloud, my stomach dropped. Not because it sounded important, because I had already seen it before. Not on a government website. Not in a legal database. I'd seen it scribbled on a yellow sticky note, sitting on my mother's kitchen counter weeks earlier. At the time, it had struck me as odd enough that I snapped a photo of it with my phone. Something about it had made my instincts twitch, though I couldn't explain why. And now that same number was being read into a courtroom record, like the serial number of a weapon. The judge leaned forward slightly. What instrument is associated with that number? He asked. The clerk continued reading in a flat, professional tone. Quitclaim deed. Recorded under instrument number 2026-0-1847. My pulse started pounding in my ears. Grantor Claire Bennett. That was me. Grantee Claire Bennett and Sloan Bennett as joint tenants. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, because Sloan Bennett was my sister, and I had never, ever, added her to the title of my house. Across the courtroom, Sloan sat confidently beside her attorney, her posture relaxed, like she already knew how this was going to end. A faint smile sat on her lips. Behind her sat our mother, Deborah, calm, composed, almost bored. As if this entire situation were just another minor family discussion. But this wasn't a family discussion. This was a hearing about ownership of my home. If you had asked me a month earlier how something like this could happen, I would have laughed and said it couldn't. Property ownership doesn't magically change overnight. There are signatures, notaries, legal filings, paper trails. But my mother had always had a very particular talent. She didn't fight loudly, she maneuvered quietly, and she always framed it the same way. I'm only trying to help. It had started harmlessly enough during a visit to her house one evening. We were sitting at her kitchen table while she stirred coffee slowly. You know your property taxes are going up again, she mentioned casually. Yeah, I saw that, I said. I could help update some paperwork, she offered. Make sure everything's structured properly. I laughed at the time. Since when are you the paperwork expert? She smiled sweetly. You're busy. I'm not. Let me help. There was nothing suspicious about it then. A few days later she asked if I still had the documents from when I bought the house. Just curious about something, she said. So I emailed her a copy of my deed from my closing paperwork, a simple PDF, nothing official, nothing signed, just information. A week after that, she brought up my sister. Sloane's doing very well lately, she said casually. I felt my shoulders tense immediately, and I asked, well, it wouldn't hurt to have family names connected to important things, she said. Just for protection. My house isn't a family group project, I replied. She waved a hand dismissively. Oh, don't be dramatic. It's just paperwork. That phrase, don't be dramatic, was one of her favorite tools. It had a way of dulling your instincts until you started questioning your own reactions. 2 weeks later, I received a strange piece of mail from the county addressed to both me and Sloan. At first I assumed it was junk. But that night something bothered me enough that I logged into the county property records portal. And there it was. Owner, Claire Bennett and Sloan Bennett. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened the deed I had saved from when I bought the house. Same property description, same parcel number. But the county record now showed a new name attached to it. like it had always been there. That's when I drove straight to my mother's house without calling. She opened the door wearing slippers. Calm as ever, Sloane was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. I held up my laptop. "Why is she on my deed?" I asked. My mother didn't flinch. "Because it's safer," she said. "For who?" I asked. Sloane finally looked up and gave me a smooth little smile. "It's already recorded," she said casually. Recorded, like she'd just updated a playlist. I turned back to my mom. "Did you file a deed?" She sighed as if I were being exhausting. "I handled some paperwork," she said. "You'll thank me later." That was the exact moment I stopped trying to reason with them. Because you can't reason someone out of a plan they created deliberately. Instead, I went home and called a real estate attorney. Her name was Janet Leland. After listening to my story, she asked only one question. "Did you ever sign a deed adding your sister to the title?" "No," I said immediately. "Never?" She paused. "Then we treat this for what it is," she said. "What's that?" "A fraudulent deed." And the next thing she told me made the entire situation even more dangerous. Because deeds don't change themselves. Someone had to walk that document into the county recorder's office. Which meant one thing. Somebody didn't just plan this. Somebody executed it. And in court that morning, the judge had just asked the clerk a question that would reveal exactly who that was. And when the answer came, my sister's confident smile finally began to crack. But what the clerk read next would reveal something far worse than a forged signature. The judge tapped his pen lightly against the bench. "Ms. Hart," he said to the records clerk, "walk the court through how a document like this is recorded." The woman nodded, clearly used to explaining the same procedure over and over again. "When a document is brought to the recorder's office," she began, "'tis logged at intake. Fees are collected, the document is scanned, indexed under the parcel number, and then the instrument number is assigned." The judge nodded once. "And how was this particular deed submitted?" Ms. Hart looked down at her screen. "In person," she said. A faint shift moved through the courtroom. "In person?" The judge repeated. "Yes, Your Honor." Front counter drop off. I felt Janet, my attorney, shift slightly beside me. Not nervously, just the quiet movement of someone who already knew the importance of that answer. Because that meant one thing. Someone had physically walked that document into the county office. The judge flipped a page in the file. "Do you retain the intake packet?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good," he said. "Bring it up. I want the return information read into the record." Ms. Hart typed quickly, clicking through several screens. Then she spoke. "Return to after recording. Deborah Bennett." The air seemed to thicken. My mother's name hung in the room like a weight. Across the courtroom, Sloane's confident posture stiffened slightly. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was the first crack I had seen all morning. The judge slowly lifted his eyes toward my mother. "Mrs. Bennett," he said calmly, "why is your name listed as the return recipient on a deed that alters ownership of your daughter's property?" My mother folded her hands in her lap, the picture of patience. "I was helping," she said softly. "Helping, that word again. She's very busy." My mother continued. "I told her I would handle some paperwork for her." The judge didn't react. Instead, he asked the only question that really mattered. "Did your daughter authorize you to record a deed adding her sister to the property title?" For just a moment, my mother looked at me. It wasn't a long look. Just a flicker. The kind someone gives when deciding exactly how much truth they can get away with. "I didn't add anyone," she said carefully. "I updated family paperwork." My jaw tightened. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Updated it how?" Before my mother could answer, Sloane spoke. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "or mother was trying to protect the house." The judge's gaze shifted to her. "Protect it from what?" Sloane didn't hesitate. "From Claire," she said. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. She makes impulsive decisions, Sloane continued calmly. Selling the house wouldn't be out of character if she got stressed. I felt anger flash through my chest. But Janet gently placed a hand on my arm. Don't react. That was the trap. If I snapped, Sloane could point to me as proof of exactly what she just claimed. Janet stood instead. Your Honor, she said, voice calm and steady, this isn't about opinions of my client's personality. She gestured toward the file. My client never signed the deed. She never appeared before a notary, and she never authorized anyone to add another owner to the property. The judge nodded slowly. Which brings us to the notary, he said. Ms. Hart was already flipping through the scanned packet. Yes, Your Honor, she said. The deed includes a notary acknowledgement. Read the name and commission. The judge ordered. She did. Janet didn't miss a beat. Your Honor, we requested the notary's journal entry for that transaction, she said. The recorder's office provided a certified copy. She handed a single document to the clerk, who passed it up to the bench. The judge read it once, then again. When he looked up, his expression had changed slightly. Mrs. Bennett, he said to my mother, you told the court this was simply paperwork. My mother nodded politely. Les, he tapped the page. This journal entry shows someone appeared before the notary and signed as your daughter. My mother's composure tightened. Well, perhaps it was done electronically, she said quickly. People sign things online now. Janet didn't roll her eyes. She didn't even sigh. She simply spoke. Not for deeds, she said. A valid acknowledgement still requires a person to appear before the notary. The judge leaned back in his chair. Men's Hart, he said. Does the intake log show who delivered the document? Yes, Your Honor. Read it. Ms. Hart looked at the screen again. Submitted in person. Intake name listed as Deborah Bennett. This time the silence felt heavier. My mother blinked several times in quick succession. Sloane's attorney shifted in his chair, and for the first time since the hearing began, the confident half-smile on Sloane's face was completely gone. The judge spoke slowly. So to be clear, he said, you physically delivered a deed that altered your daughter's ownership rights. My mother lifted her chin. I didn't remove her, she insisted. Her name is still on it. That's not the issue, the judge replied. You changed the legal rights attached to that property. He paused. That is not a minor update. Janet stepped forward again. Your Honor, she said. My client also has something else the court should see. She handed me a look. I unlocked my phone and passed it to her. She showed the screen to the judge. A simple photograph, a yellow sticky note sitting on a kitchen counter, and written across it in my mother's handwriting were the numbers 2026 011-1847. The recording number, Janet said. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. When was this photo taken? He asked. 3 weeks before my client discovered the deed had been recorded, Janet said. The judge leaned back slowly. So the instrument number existed in Mrs. Bennett's possession before the owner of the property even knew her title had been altered. Sloane's attorney finally stood up. Your Honor, this is speculation. No. The judge interrupted calmly. This is a paper trail. He turned to Ms. Hart again. Does the recorder's office retain the full recording packet? Yes. I want the scanned deed, the intake sheet, and the fee receipt preserved. Then he added something that made my mother's fingers tighten in her lap. And if there's surveillance footage at the recorder's counter, I want that preserved as well. My mother spoke too quickly. Footage. The judge looked directly at her. Yes, he said. Because now he wasn't deciding whether I was being dramatic. He was deciding whether someone had committed fraud. And the next witness he ordered into the courtroom would determine something critical. Someone was about to explain who actually appeared before the notary that day, and when that person opened their journal, The story my mother and sister had been telling was about to collide with a very inconvenient detail. A detail that involved an ID card. That didn't belong to me. But when the notary revealed what kind of identification had been used, the entire courtroom would realize this wasn't just a forged deed, it was identity theft. When the notary walked into the courtroom, the atmosphere changed. He was a man in his late 50s, wearing a navy sport coat over a simple polo shirt. In his hands he carried a thick, hardbound journal, gripping it carefully like it was something fragile or important. The bailiff swore him in, and he took the witness stand. The judge didn't waste time. Please state your name for the record. The man did. Are you the notary whose seal appears on the quitclaim deed recorded under instrument number 2026-01847? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, the notary replied calmly. My stomach tightened. The judge tapped the document on his desk. Did Claire Bennett appear before you and sign this deed? For a moment, the notary hesitated. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but I saw it. Then he answered carefully. I notarized a signature on that date. Across the aisle, Sloane's attorney leaned back slightly, looking satisfied with that answer. My mother's shoulders relaxed just a little. But Janet didn't move. She simply stood. Your Honor, she said. May the witness produce the journal entry associated with that notarization? The judge nodded. Show the court the journal. The notary opened the heavy book and flipped through several pages until he reached a tab section. He placed the journal on the stand. The judge leaned forward, read the entry. He instructed, slowly. The notary traced his finger down the page. Date, time, document type, quitclaim deed. He paused. Signer listed as Claire Bennett. My pulse started hammering again. The judge gestured for him to continue. Identification presented. Driver's license, State of Nevada. The room went completely still. My mind struggled to process the words. Nevada? I had never lived in Nevada. Never even had a driver's license issued there. Janet spoke calmly. Could you please read the last 4 digits of the license number recorded in your journal? The notary did. Janet turned toward me briefly. Then she handed a document to the clerk. Your Honor, she said, this is my client's actual driver's license record. The clerk passed it up. The judge compared the 2 pages silently. Then he spoke in a flat voice. These numbers do not match. Sloane's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, it's entirely possible the notary simply recorded the number incorrectly. Possible, the judge said calmly. But then the question becomes, who is actually present? He turned back to the notary. Did you photocopy the identification that was presented? Yes, the notary replied. Produce it. The notary reached into a folder he had brought with him and removed a printed sheet. The clerk carried it to the judge. From where I sat, I could see only part of it, but that was enough. My name was printed at the top. The photograph looked vaguely like me. The hair color was close. The face shape similar, but it wasn't me. It looked like someone had tried to recreate my identity using guesswork, and the Nevada logo at the top confirmed it. Fake. The judge studied the page carefully. Then he asked a question that seemed almost casual. Who paid for the notarization? The notary blinked. I'm sorry. The transaction. The judge said. Cash, card, invoice. How was it paid? The notary looked back at his journal card. He said, card ending in 6829. Janet stepped forward again. Your Honor, she said, handing another document to the clerk. We subpoenaed the notary business's merchant receipt this morning. The judge accepted the paper and read it. Then he slowly lifted his eyes toward Sloane. Miss Bennett, he said. This payment was processed under the name Sloane Bennett Holdings. The air seemed to leave the room all at once. Sloane's face drained of color. Because now the story had changed. This wasn't my mother quietly handling paperwork. This was my sister paying for the moment my identity was used. Her attorney tried to speak. Your Honor. But no sound came out at first. The judge raised a hand. Not yet. Then he turned back to the notary. One more question. The notary nodded nervously. Do you remember who brought the signer to your office? The man hesitated again. I don't remember the face clearly, he said slowly. But I do remember there were 2 women. Janet spoke. 2 women? Yes, he confirmed. One of them did most of the talking. The judge's gaze shifted slowly from the witness stand to my mother, then to Sloan. Neither of them looked comfortable anymore. Then the judge asked the final question. Does your office have surveillance cameras? The notary swallowed. Less. Good. The judge said. Preserve that footage immediately. Sloan's attorney stood up again, voice tight. Your Honor, this hearing is starting to look like a criminal investigation. No. The judge replied sharply. This is still a civil matter. He paused. But the facts are becoming very interesting. Then he turned to the county clerk again. Mems Hart, what is the current status of this deed in the property records? It is active and indexed, Your Honor. The judge nodded once. Can your office place a fraud alert on the parcel? Yes, with a court order. You'll have one? Then he looked at Janet. Counsel, do you have any reason to believe this deed has already been used for a sale or refinance attempt? Janet didn't even look at me. She simply reached into her folder and pulled out a printed email. Yes, she said. The clerk handed it to the judge. He read the header silently. Then his eyes narrowed, because the email was from a title company. Subject line, escrow file opened, property inquiry received. My stomach twisted. Janet explained calmly. My client received an automated title alert yesterday. Someone initiated a property inquiry using the newly recorded deed. Sloan's attorney stood again. That proves nothing. Title inquiries happen all the time. The judge cut him off with a glance. An inquiry, plus a forged ID, plus a paid notarization, he said slowly, is more than enough for this court. Then he turned toward my mother. Mrs. Bennett, he said quietly, you told this court this was just paperwork. He tapped the documents in front of him. Now we have your name on the recorder intake log, your daughter paying the notary, and a fake ID used to impersonate the property owner. My mother opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The judge leaned forward. Here is what is going to happen next. And the order he gave would freeze everything my sister had planned. But just when it seemed like the worst evidence had already surfaced, the county clerk noticed something strange inside the recording packet. A handwritten note. And when she read what was written on that note, the courtroom realized this deed was never meant to be the only one. There was a second document, a backup plan. A second deed that would have erased my name from the property completely. And it had been sitting in the county archives the entire time. The judge had just finished reviewing the title company email when the county records clerk spoke again. Your Honor, Miss Hart said cautiously, there's something else in the recording packet. The judge looked up. What kind of note? She checked the digital file again. There appears to be a handwritten cross reference on the intake cover sheet, she explained. It references a prior instrument number. My pulse immediately jumped. A prior instrument. The judge asked. Les. The judge tapped his pen once, read it. Miss Hart read the digits slowly. The moment I heard them, the air left my lungs. Because I had seen that number before 2 months ago. Another yellow sticky note on my mother's kitchen counter. Next to 2 words written in her neat handwriting, backup deed. Janet slowly turned her head toward me. Across the courtroom, Sloan's lawyer suddenly looked less confident. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Hart, he said. Retrieve that file. She hesitated slightly. It's in the archive, Your Honor. Then we'll open the archive. That sentence changed the energy in the room. Because if there was a second deed, This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. The judge called a brief recess. Miss Hart disappeared through a side door with the clerk. Janet leaned toward me quietly. "Don't turn around," she whispered. "Why? Because they're panicking?" I kept my eyes forward, but the sounds behind me told their own story. Chairs shifted. Papers rustled. Someone whispered urgently. Sloane's attorney was speaking quickly to her. My mother remained silent. 10 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again. Miss Hart returned, but she wasn't alone. Another woman walked beside her wearing a navy blazer with a county badge clipped at her waist. In her hands was a clear evidence sleeve containing a thick packet of documents. The kind used when something is being handled as an official record. The judge straightened. "State your name." "Lynette Shaw," the woman replied. "Senior duty recorder." He gestured toward the evidence sleeve, as that the prior recording packet referenced in the intake sheet. "Yes, Your Honor." Sloane's attorney blurted before he could stop himself. "That document was rejected." The judge's eyes flicked toward him. "Sit down, counselor." Lynette continued calmly. "Some submissions are rejected during intake," she explained. "Wrong fees, missing pages, expired notary commissions, things like that. When that happens, the document is not recorded, but the packet is retained in our archive." The judge nodded. "Place it with the clerk." The bailiff logged the sleeve, and the clerk carefully opened it. The judge flipped the first page. His expression changed immediately. "Ms. Hart," he said quietly, "read the return information." She did. "Return to after recording Deborah Bennett." My mother's name again. But this time something else caught the judge's attention. A yellow sticky note taped to the intake sheet. My heart started pounding, because I recognized the handwriting instantly. My mother's. The judge lifted the note carefully. "Is this part of the retained packet?" he asked Lynette. "Yes, Your Honor." "It was attached at intake." He turned to the clerk. "Read it into the record." The room felt like it leaned forward as the clerk spoke. "If this one gets rejected, use the other deed. Keep both numbers." A quiet gasp came from somewhere in the gallery. My mouth went dry. Sloane's lawyer had stopped moving completely. For the first time all morning, my mother looked shaken. Janet remained calm. "Your Honor," she said, "we ask that the note be marked as an exhibit." "Granted." The judge flipped deeper into the rejected packet. Then he paused at the signature page. "Why was this rejected?" he asked. Lynette pointed to the corner. "The notary's commission had expired." "So it never recorded?" "Correct." The judge turned another page. "What was the purpose of this deed?" Lynette gestured toward the grantee line. The judge looked at Miss Hart. "Read it." She read slowly. "Grantee, Sloane Bennett as sole owner." The room went silent, because this wasn't a deed adding Sloane to the property. This one removed me entirely. Janet spoke clearly. "Your Honor, that means there were two attempts. The first deed added Sloane as a joint owner. The backup deed would have made her the sole owner." The judge turned toward my mother. "Mrs. Bennett," he said quietly, "you told your daughter this was just a name." He tapped the rejected deed. "This is not just a name." He paused. "This is a plan to take a house." My mother didn't answer. The judge flipped another page. "Who prepared this document?" Lynette read the cover sheet. "Prepared by Deborah Bennett." Another silence settled over the room. Then the judge asked the next question. "Who paid the recording fees?" Lynette checked the attached receipt. Card ending in 6A29. Janet stepped forward again. "Your Honor, that card is registered to Sloane Bennett Holdings." Sloane's attorney sank into his chair. The judge turned to Sloane. "You paid for a notarization and attempted filing that would have made you sole owner of property you did not purchase." Her attorney jumped up. "There is no evidence she knew. She paid for it." The judge replied calmly. "That is enough for today." Then he turned back to my mother. Did you sign or present this document for notarization? My mother's voice had lost its confidence. I was trying to keep the house in the family, she said quietly. The judge pointed toward me. She is your family. No one spoke after that. Finally, Janet handed the judge one last document, an email. Your Honor, she said. This came from North Harbor Bank. The judge read it carefully. Then he looked up slowly. Because the email contained one line that explained everything. Collateral verification pending title update. The judge leaned back in his chair. So this wasn't a misunderstanding, he said. It was a financing plan. My mother's shoulders slumped. The judge raised his pen. Here is what the court is going to do. And the orders he was about to issue would stop the sale, freeze the title, and unravel the entire scheme. But before the hearing ended, one final question remained. The judge looked directly at my mother. Mrs. Bennett, he said. Why? And the answer she gave next would expose something even worse than fraud. It would reveal why my sister needed my house in the first place. The silence inside the courtroom felt heavier than before, like the entire building understood that something important had just shifted. Papers rustled softly as the judge studied the document that had just been entered into the record. My sister Sloane, who had spent the entire hearing looking confident and untouchable, no longer appeared so certain. Her fingers tightened slightly around the folder on her lap. For months, Sloane had been convinced this moment would go exactly the way she planned. She had walked into the courtroom earlier with the same calm expression she used when she believed she had already won. Our mother, Deborah, had sat just behind her, wearing that polite smile she always used when pretending everything was under control. But things were no longer unfolding according to their plan. The judge leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes moving slowly across the page. No one spoke. Even the quiet background noises of the courthouse hallway seemed to fade away. Finally, he looked up. Counsel, he said, directing his attention to Sloane's attorney, were you aware of this filing? The attorney cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. The confident tone he had used earlier in the hearing was gone. No, Your Honor, he admitted carefully. This document was not disclosed to us previously. A quiet murmur spread through the small group of observers seated in the back of the courtroom. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to signal that everyone understood the importance of what had just happened. I glanced briefly toward my lawyer, who gave a small nod. It wasn't a celebration, just quiet confirmation that the truth had finally made its way into the room. The judge tapped his pen lightly against the desk. This recording, he said slowly, appears to indicate a transfer of interest filed prior to the claim currently being presented. Sloane shifted in her seat. Her composure, which had seemed unbreakable earlier, was beginning to crack. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering urgently, but whatever explanation she was searching for didn't seem to come easily. For years, our family had operated on unspoken assumptions. Sloane always believed she could outmaneuver everyone. Our mother had always backed her up, convinced that confidence alone could rewrite reality. But documents don't bend to confidence. Records tell the story exactly as it happened. The judge looked toward the clerk again. Can you confirm that this instrument number corresponds with the property currently under dispute? Yes, Your Honor, the clerk replied. It matches the address and parcel identification exactly. The words landed in the room like a quiet, but undeniable verdict. Sloane's attorney tried once more to recover. Your Honor, he began. We would request additional time to review the validity of this filing. The judge raised a hand slightly. You may review it, he said calmly. However, the record reflects that this document was legally filed and publicly accessible. The court cannot ignore that. Sloane's jaw tightened. For the first time all morning, she turned and looked directly at me. There was frustration in her expression, but also something else, something closer to disbelief. It was the look of someone realizing their version of events wasn't the only one that mattered. Behind her, our mother's expression had also changed. The calm mask she had worn earlier was gone. Instead, she looked uneasy, as though she was suddenly aware that the situation had slipped beyond her control. The judge closed the folder in front of him. Based on the evidence presented today, he said, the court will take this matter under advisement and issue a written ruling. However, the newly introduced record raises serious questions about the validity of the claim brought before this court. No one spoke, but the meaning was clear enough. The case Sloan had built so confidently was no longer standing on solid ground. As the judge stood and exited the courtroom, the quiet tension slowly dissolved into movement. Chairs shifted, papers were gathered, and people began filing toward the door. Sloan remained seated for a moment longer. Her attorney spoke quietly to her, explaining something while pointing at the document again. She nodded stiffly, though it was obvious she didn't like what she was hearing. I stood beside my lawyer as we packed our folders. Good work, he said quietly. That filing changed everything. I looked once more toward the other side of the room. For the first time since this entire fight began, Sloan looked uncertain. Not defeated, but uncertain. And sometimes, uncertainty is the beginning of the truth finally catching up. As I walked out of the courthouse doors and into the afternoon light, I realized something important. The battle over the house wasn't just about property. It was about history, about decisions made years earlier that people hoped would stay buried. But records have a way of waiting patiently until the right moment. And today, one forgotten document had finally spoken. But the real question, the one no one in that courtroom could answer yet, was this: when the judge's final ruling arrives, whose version of the past will it truly belong to?